The chamber shook as Donald Trump slammed his hand on the table, sneering, "Sit down, girl," while Jasmine Crockett refused to blink. This wasn't just noise. It was about glaring holes in his 2019 to 2020 financial reports. Numbers too big to ignore. Cameras snapped, the air turned electric, and the nation held its breath. When Donald Trump and Jasmine Crockett collide in this battle of power versus truth, who will be the one left standing? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The hearing room was packed to the edge. Every seat taken, every camera live. Dozens of reporters stood behind red velvet ropes, phones raised, ready to catch history or disaster. The banner read Oversight Committee, Federal Financial Transparency, but the mood felt more like a trial than a discussion. At the center table, Donald Trump sat like he owned the building. Arms relaxed, posture arrogant, flipping through paperwork he barely looked at. His lips curled into a smirk that didn't belong in a courtroom. It belonged in a casino. Every gesture screamed the same message. You can't touch me. And the worst part, he believed it. Then the back doors opened, and the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Jasmine Crockett walked in with slow, deliberate steps, not looking left or right. She didn't wave, didn't smile. Her eyes locked straight ahead, and when she reached her seat, she adjusted the mic with the precision of someone loading a weapon. For one long second, no one moved. Reporters froze mid-note. A Republican staffer coughed and immediately regretted it. Even Trump looked up. His smirk remained, but there was a flicker, just a flicker. Because Jasmine didn't hesitate. She didn't even blink. She sat down. She leaned forward, and with her fingers calmly resting on a closed folder, she looked straight at him, cold, unshaken, unbothered. The air tightened. The silence grew heavier, and across the room someone whispered what everyone else was thinking. This is not going to end well. Jasmine adjusted the mic slowly, like she wasn't just preparing to speak, she was preparing to cut. Her fingers brushed the folder beside her, but she didn't open it yet. She didn't need to. Her eyes never left the man sitting across from her, the man surrounded by legacy, lawsuits, and a lifetime of bluster. Donald Trump hadn't even pretended to hide his indifference. He looked past her like she was background noise in a room built for him. But Jasmine knew exactly what she was doing. Her voice, when it came, was smooth, steady, unshaken. Mr. Trump, can you explain the massive discrepancies in your 2019 and 2020 asset disclosures, specifically those tied to your overseas holdings? No one moved. A dozen reporters leaned forward in unison, pens frozen midair. The cameras all zoomed in at once, their internal motors buzzing like a swarm of wasps. Staffers exchanged glances behind their clipboards, and somewhere near the rear, a congressional aide bit their lips so hard it left a mark. Jasmine said nothing else. She let the question hang in the room like a loaded weapon, silent, dangerous, undeniable. Trump didn't answer right away. He blinked once, then leaned back with an exaggerated sigh, as if the moment bored him. The weight of the room, so heavy just seconds before, slid off his shoulders like rain off glass. His fingers drummed the edge of the desk, not with nerves, but with something worse. Amusement. A slow smirk curled at the edge of his lips, the kind born from years of unchecked power. Then, without looking at her directly, he spoke. Do you have any idea how many buildings I've built? How many deals I've closed? He finally looked up, and the smirk turned into a sneer. You're just a little congresswoman from Texas. You really think you're qualified to question me? The words weren't just arrogant. They were venom dipped in velvet. In any other room, with any other woman, it might have landed like a gut punch. But in this room, with Jasmine staring him down like a surgeon about to make her first incision, it only sharpened the tension. Gasps didn't echo, but expressions changed. The reporters didn't look up from their notepads, but their pens moved faster. Trump, emboldened by his own performance, grabbed a pen from the table and began tapping it rhythmically against the wood, each click louder than it should have been. He let out a small laugh, low and mocking. Then he said it. You don't even have the range to understand my finances. Another click of the pen, another pause. Then came the dismissal, not just verbal, but physical. He flicked his hand toward her like she was dust. turned his head slightly to the side and smirked again. "Sit down, girl." It hit like a hammer to glass. The room didn't gasp. It froze. The smirk stayed on his face, but it looked tighter now, like it knew it had gone too far and was trying to pretend it hadn't. The chairman shifted in his seat, uncomfortable but silent. No one moved, not even the cameras. One reporter stopped recording, rewound the clip, then hit record again. They needed to be sure they heard it right. Jasmine didn't react. Not yet. She just sat there, still, unblinking, because she didn't need to fire back. Not when the entire room had just seen exactly what kind of man she was dealing with. And the storm? It hadn't passed. It was only beginning. Trump thought the insult would throw her off, that she'd shrink. But Jasmine didn't even blink. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was control. And now she was ready to use it. She leaned into her mic, steady and calm. "Respect isn't given by towers, Mr. Trump. Respect is earned by truth." Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a blade. No one spoke. No one moved. Several lawmakers lowered their eyes as if they'd just seen a line they couldn't pretend wasn't there. Jasmine opened the folder in front of her and pulled out the first document. "This is your 2019 financial disclosure, filed with the Office of Government Ethics," she said. "You listed the Doral Resort at $50 million. She held up the document clearly. Then she pulled out a second page, an internal appraisal. "But this valuation, done by your own accounting team just 3 months earlier, put it at $112 million. She didn't pause. She reached for another page, an email. "This message," she said, "was sent by Alan Weisselberg, your chief financial officer, to one of your lenders. In it, he inflates that same Doral property again, this time to $135 million. Her eyes locked on him. Same quarter, same property, 3 different numbers. That's not accounting. That's deception. She moved on. "In your 2020 filing, you claimed Mar-a-Lago's value dropped by 40%, she continued, her voice tightening. "The timing just happened to fall right before tax reassessment." She flipped the page. "But here's what you told your private investment partners. The property had gained over 3 times its reported value. And here," she tapped a section near the bottom of the page, "you promised guaranteed returns based on that inflated number." Trump stopped moving. His smile faded, replaced by something harder to name. He gripped the edge of the table. His pen rested still in his hand, no longer tapping. Jasmine kept going. She pulled out one final document. "This is a letter from Deutsche Bank," she said clearly. "The financial institution that underwrites more of your holdings than any other. According to their 2020 audit, the collateral you offered them doesn't match either of the numbers you reported publicly or privately." She held it for a beat, then looked up. 3 numbers, 1 property, and only one of them can be legal. Trump snapped. "Fake numbers! Another witch hunt!" he shouted, loud enough to echo against the chamber walls. His hand slammed against the table. The room jumped. Even the chairman's gavel hand twitched, though he didn't bring it down. But Jasmine stayed still. Her face didn't change. She picked up the final sheet and slid it across the table. "These numbers are not mine, Mr. Trump," she said, cold and calm. "They came from your primary bank." And that was it. No one said a word, because nothing else had to be said. Jasmine's voice had landed like a hammer wrapped in silk. Trump had no defense, only noise. And when the truth corners a man like that, the mask slips. The room didn't need a gavel. It needed a spine. And Trump did exactly what wounded power always does. He went on the attack. His body jerked forward in the chair, no longer relaxed. His face, once smug, twisted into something harder, meaner. His voice cracked like a whip, louder than it had been all morning. "Women like you, seen it 1,000 times, playing hero for the cameras. You're nothing but a girl chasing attention." Every syllable dripped with contempt. He didn't say it to debate. He said it to diminish her. Gasps echoed softly like the start of a tremor. Across the dais, a staffer's hand froze mid-keystroke. Jasmine didn't flinch, but the room around her tensed like a bowstring pulled too tight. Trump wasn't finished. He leaned to his left, motioning dramatically toward the row of reporters and photographers lining the walls like sentries. His voice surged again, sharp and mocking. "Write it down. This is the circus they came for, and she's performing. He laughed, short, bitter, intentional. The sound didn't amuse. It unsettled. A few Republican lawmakers exchanged smirks. One nodded slowly, arms crossed, like he'd just watched a punchline. Another whispered something to an aide, both chuckling quietly, as if the hearing had turned into a stage play, and Jasmine was merely the act. But it wasn't theater. It was humiliation dressed up as rhetoric. The oxygen in the room felt thinner now, like everyone had just realized they were breathing the same poison. Trump had turned his full weight, his voice, his presence, his name, into a weapon, not to defend himself, but to make Jasmine small, invisible, replaceable. But she was still sitting there, still breathing, still looking him in the eye. And he hadn't broken her, not yet. Trump's smirk had returned, but it was cracking at the edges. His insults hadn't worked. His swagger was unraveling. And in the space between his arrogance and her silence, Jasmine saw something rare in that room. Fear. Not loud, not obvious, but real. And she didn't let it go to waste. She didn't give him a look, didn't glance at the press. Her eyes never left the man who had tried to reduce her to noise. If this is a show, then your numbers are the script, and you wrote it wrong. The room tightened. Her tone wasn't angry. It was clinical. She wasn't here to perform. She was here to dissect. Jasmine reached down, pulled out a thick packet clipped with a black binder, and laid it flat in front of her like a final puzzle piece. The top page was stamped with bold text, Balmedy Estate, Acquisition and Development. She flipped it open slowly, letting each page rustle like turning blades. Let's talk about Scotland, she said. Specifically, your Balmedy property in Aberdeen. Trump shifted in his seat. His fingers, which had been tapping moments earlier, now sat still. She turned to page 2, held it up briefly for the room to see, then read, You reported this acquisition as a $100 million investment. Her eyes scanned the room. But the official purchase record filed with the Scottish Land Registry lists the actual sale price at $32.6 million. She paused, not for effect, but to let the weight of that gap sink into the silence. That's not rounding. That's inflation. By nearly $70 million. Whispers shot across the room like electricity. Aides leaned over to whisper into their boss's ears. Reporters shifted in their chairs, thumbing record buttons on their phones. On the committee bench, 2 Republican members suddenly looked down at their papers, avoiding eye contact. Jasmine wasn't looking for a reaction. She was bearing it in evidence. She flipped to another section of the binder, this time an email thread highlighted in yellow. Here's correspondence between your chief financial officer and Silverworth Valuation Services. She continued, calm and composed. In this exchange, your CFO explicitly requests they raise the asset's market value before you used it to leverage a foreign loan. She tapped the page twice. That's not projection. That's premeditated distortion for profit. Trump's face hardened. His lips parted slightly like he wanted to cut her off, but no words came. A pause, then he gave a dry, shaky chuckle that lacked all the weight it used to carry. His voice came out gritted, almost defensive. All lies. You don't understand business. The tone wasn't commanding anymore. It was cornered, as if he could feel the room slipping out from under him. But Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't break eye contact. She didn't even lift her hands. She just stared across the table, calm as ever, and said, I understand enough to know you hit it. And justice doesn't sell the way your real estate does. The silence that followed wasn't passive. It was sharp, active, charged. It wasn't about the committee anymore. It was about what had just shifted, what had just snapped. And Trump, for the first time in that hearing, looked like a man out of script. The room was still vibrating from Jasmine's last blow. Her words had landed like a steel hammer against glass. Trump's mouth twitched, his jaw locked in place. He couldn't argue with the documents, and the silence that followed said everything. Then something cracked, not in the room, but inside him. His hands clenched, his chest puffed. His ego, bruised and flailing, lashed out in the only way it knew how. Violence disguised as voice. Without warning, Trump slammed his palm against the desk, the sound sharp and brutal like a gunshot ricocheting through marble halls. His face burned red, veins pressing hard against his temples. Then came the outburst. "Sit down, girl. I don't take lectures from nobodies." It wasn't just yelling. It was a detonation, the kind that reveals what's always been buried underneath. Gasps tore through the hearing chamber, but no one dared to speak. The chairman's gavel twitched in the air, suspended by indecision. Staffers froze mid-note. Journalists dropped their pens. Phones stopped recording, not out of respect, but shock. What echoed wasn't just an insult. It was a raw, unfiltered act of humiliation, hurled across the room with centuries of weight behind it. Some lawmakers shifted in their seats, eyes darting to one another, wondering if they should say something, anything. But nothing came, because in that moment, Trump hadn't just crossed a line, he tore it out of the ground. Racial, gendered, derogatory. It was the second peak, and it wasn't just offensive. It was historical. But Jasmine didn't rise. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. With precise, unshaken grace, she reached toward her microphone, adjusted it slowly. The kind of movement that says, "I'm not scared of storms, I walk through them." Her eyes locked on Trump, not with rage, but with something colder, clarity. Her silence said more than his shouting ever could. And then, when she did speak, it didn't sound like revenge, it sounded like justice. "You may have silenced women in your life," she said, her voice steady, her tone sharpened like a scalpel. "But not here, not today. I'm not here to serve you. I'm here to serve the truth." The words didn't echo. They pierced. And no one in that chamber, not Trump, not the committee, not the viewers across America, would forget what it sounded like when power tried to silence a woman and failed. The echo of Jasmine's words had not faded before the tension in the room shifted. Not with noise, but with stillness. Her calm defiance had exposed something raw, something unspoken. Trump had been loud. She had been clear. And in that clarity, power changed hands. What came next wasn't just a reaction. It was desperation, cloaked in the armor of old habits. And they were cracking fast. Trump's jaw locked, eyes flaring as he snapped toward her like a wounded animal cornered. The control he thought he had was slipping, and he could feel it. His voice lashed out, sharp, bitter, panicked. "You're making this up. The people don't care. This is just a show." The words hit the air, but they didn't land. They hung there, hollow, like a balloon already deflated. Around the room, eyes blinked, not in shock, but in recognition. Recognition that he wasn't speaking for anyone but himself now. The same old lines, the same old play. But something had changed, and he hadn't noticed. His shoulders tensed as he turned sharply to the chairman, searching for rescue in a room that had grown colder by the second. His voice rose again, loud enough to cover his own uncertainty. "Remove her. I won't answer questions from someone so disrespectful." But the chairman didn't move. His hand hovered near the gavel, fingers twitching slightly, unsure. The silence around him wasn't confusion. It was clarity. For the first time in that hearing, no one rushed to defend Trump. No one stood up. No one agreed. The power he'd wielded like a sword now felt like a weight dragging him down. Across the chamber, something deeper than noise began to build. Heads turned. People exchanged quiet glances. Some folded their arms. Some looked down. Others slowly, deliberately, began to shake their heads. The audience wasn't with him anymore. And worse, he could feel it. The room was shifting under his feet. Even his closest allies sat stiff, their faces tight, their eyes avoiding contact. The distance was visible, not in words but in posture. A silent retreat. Trump's attempt to reassert control had done the opposite. It revealed just how much control he'd already lost. This wasn't strength. This was a scramble. A man so used to commanding the stage, now flailing to stay on it. His voice had been fire. Now it was smoke. This was the third climax, not in a blaze of fury, but in the unraveling of a myth. And the most devastating part? No one was surprised anymore. The tension in the room had already reached a boiling point. But what Jasmine did next didn't just raise the stakes. It detonated them. She reached into her binder and slowly pulled out a thick, sealed dossier, its edges marked with red tabs and a Department of Treasury seal. Without a word, she peeled the evidence tape, opened it, and unfolded a single printed page, crisp and damning. It wasn't loud, but the sound of the paper sliding across the wood table felt like thunder. It was an internal email, dated October 3rd, 2020, marked confidential, eyes only. The sender, Elliot Ramsey, Donald Trump's long-serving financial advisor. The subject, Optics Protocol, BW Operation. Beneath that, in bold, read a single directive written by hand and digitally signed, Insert BW Trump. Keep optics clean. Execute quietly. D. Trump. She held it up so that every camera in the chamber could catch it. She let the silence stretch, knowing what the weight of those 12 words would do to the room. Then she laid the paper flat and looked straight ahead. Across the aisle, Trump's face froze. Whatever blood had been in his cheeks disappeared. He didn't move. Not a twitch. Not a word. Just eyes locked on that paper, like a man staring at the ghost of a decision he thought would never see daylight. Jasmine kept her voice low, even, but razor sharp. This is a direct email chain between your financial advisor, Mr. Ramsey, and your inner circle. The subject line is clear. The instruction is clear. It bears your digital signature. You knew about this operation. You approved it. Members of the chamber leaned forward. The tension was no longer ambient. It was suffocating. She tapped her finger on the three key words. Insert BW Trump. Her eyes scanned the room. Let me break that down so there's no confusion. BW stands for Black Woman, internal code used by your campaign and legal team. Not by accident, not as slang, as a deliberate branding label. There was a sharp inhale from the audience. One aide dropped their pen. Jasmine's tone turned colder. This wasn't about hiring. This wasn't about strategy. This was about optics, image management. The memo outlines a directive to insert BW Trump into a sequence of public legal efforts, meaning place a Black woman into proximity, allegiance, or confrontation with you to create the illusion of fairness, diversity, or dominance, depending on the setting. She gestured toward the quote again, keep optics clean. That line is self-explanatory. It means control the narrative. Don't let the press catch the real imbalance of power. Hide the architecture of manipulation. And then the final command, execute quietly. No press release, no announcement. Just move the pieces into place. Let the cameras do the rest, as if it's all real, as if it's earned, as if the whole damn thing isn't fake. She turned toward Trump now, her eyes locked on him like a scope. Her voice dropped to a slow, precise drawl. You call me girl? This is how you call yourself in your own records. Evidence from your own team. There's no way left for you to escape. Dead silence. Trump didn't blink. His mouth was slightly open, but no words came. The audience behind him sat in stone silence. His attorneys looked like they had just swallowed glass. Jasmine took a step back, the document still visible. She didn't need to raise her voice. The truth was doing all the shouting. Her posture, composed, her eyes steady, her tone, lethal. This wasn't just a slip-up. This was an exposed mechanism, a hidden playbook now lying in public view. Insert BW Trump wasn't a phrase. It was a strategy, a machine of perception, greased by prejudice and signed by the man now sitting frozen in his chair. From the back, a gasp. From the left, a hand gripping a table edge. But no one said a word, because they couldn't, because there was nothing left to deny. This was the third peak, the final blow. And as Jasmine stood tall, the weight of one sentence hovering like a hammer, the entire chamber understood one thing. Trump wasn't just cornered. He was dismantled. The air hadn't moved in nearly 30 seconds. No one dared to exhale. The weight of the email, insert BW Trump, keep optics clean, execute quietly, D. Trump, was still settling like ash after an explosion. Every word had landed with surgical precision, but the silence that followed was even more lethal. All eyes shifted to Donald Trump, not with anticipation, but with disbelief, like they were watching a skyscraper tremble seconds before the collapse. He was sitting upright just moments ago. Now his shoulders had dropped slightly, his posture loosened, as though something inside him had disconnected. His hands, once confidently draped over the desk, now fidgeted nervously. He stared straight ahead, but his eyes were distant, scanning something far beyond the walls of that hearing room, perhaps searching for a defense that no longer existed, or perhaps, for the first time in decades, realizing he had none. His mouth opened faintly. No sound, just the subtle twitch of his lower lip, then a slow exhale through his nose. He blinked rapidly. He wasn't confused. He was cornered, and everyone could see it. This wasn't the posture of a man preparing to argue. It was the instinctive stillness of someone caught in the open, with nowhere left to run. Then something even stranger. The trembling started. Not visibly at first, but enough that the pen in his right hand gave a soft click as it tapped involuntarily against the table. His fingers tried to grip it again, then failed. The pen rolled forward an inch. He didn't reach for it. Across from him, Jasmine didn't move. She didn't gloat. She didn't even blink. Her silence was louder than any shout. Because she knew, and now so did everyone else. This was the moment that no amount of spin could erase. No aide could intercept. No lawyer could redact. The truth was sitting right there on government record, and it had his name signed at the bottom. "Mr. Trump," the chairman said at last, breaking the silence with a firm rap of the gavel, "you are required to respond to the witness." Trump didn't look up. He pressed his lips together, then wet them with a dry flick of his tongue. He glanced at a staffer standing off to the side, eyes pleading, but the staffer offered nothing. No whisper, no cue card, no lifeline. Trump's head dipped lower, and his fingers began tracing the edge of the table, aimless, distracted, as if grounding himself in anything tangible. The gavel struck again, louder this time. "Mr. Trump, this committee demands a response." Still, nothing. He exhaled sharply through his nostrils, a half-swallowed grunt, then looked down at his own lap like the answer was hidden there. But the damage had already been done. The room had already seen too much. The mighty presence he once commanded had unraveled before their eyes, and all that remained was a man rendered speechless by his own shadow. His hand, previously clenched, now laid flat against the table. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple, rare considering the air conditioning was on full blast. His breathing became visible, chest rising and falling in uneven intervals. His lips parted once more, but they didn't shape a word, just the ghost of a response. Silence before it was born. And then, another sound. The unmistakable hollow tap of his fingertip nervously striking the tabletop. Once, twice, then a frenzy of uneven taps, like his body was betraying the tension he refused to show in his face. "Mr. Trump, do you have anything to say?" the chairman pressed. But Trump remained still. He wasn't refusing to answer out of defiance. This wasn't strategy. This was paralysis. His mind might have been screaming, racing, trying to reach for anything, some procedural delay, some half-truth, some pivot tactic. But his body had gone stiff. His voice, usually loud enough to dominate a room, was absent. He had become a ghost of the man who swaggered into that chamber hours earlier. On the panel, even his defenders sat back, silent, still, lips pressed in thin, nervous lines. The chain of loyalty had cracked. The performance was over. No one dared interrupt the spectacle of his undoing, and in the audience it was like time had frozen. Journalists, pens hovering, spectators leaning forward but unmoving. Some faces were shocked, others grimly satisfied, but they were all united by one realization. They had just witnessed the moment Donald Trump lost the room. Not with a bang, but with a stare, a tremble, and a silence that refused to end. Even the Capitol Police near the exits subtly shifted position, not because they expected disruption, but because they too felt the atmosphere had changed. The storm wasn't coming, it had already passed, and the wreckage sat hunched at the witness table. Jasmine stood tall. She didn't adjust her mic. She didn't blink. Her face, unreadable but unshaken, held the room captive, and in that stillness everyone could sense it. The power had moved, not with ceremony, not with drama, but like a tectonic shift, permanent, irreversible, and undeniable. The man who once stood above the rules now sat beneath them. The man who silenced others was now silenced by his own words. There was no applause, no shouts, just the quiet reckoning of a room watching history recalibrate itself, second by second. And as Trump remained frozen, fingers still twitching, head still bowed, the only sound was the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the dull echo of the gavel, still reverberating like the toll of a bell. Because power doesn't always fall with fire. Sometimes it collapses in silence. The silence after Jasmine's revelation clung to the chamber like smoke after an explosion. A heartbeat ago, Trump had been loud, brash, his words filling the room like a storm battering the walls. Now that voice was gone. He sat there, lips parting as though to form a sentence. But nothing came. The sound never arrived. His jaw trembled ever so slightly, and for the first time all afternoon, he looked like a man cornered with no way out. Eyes darted from one end of the hearing room to the other. Reporters froze mid-keystroke, fingers suspended over screens as if they were afraid even typing would break the tension. Staffers who had been whispering earlier were now stiff-backed, eyes wide, unsure whether to glance at Jasmine or keep their gaze fixed on Trump. The weight of the silence was crushing. It wasn't just quiet, it was suffocating, like the entire nation had leaned in and held its breath all at once. Trump's face was flushed a deep crimson, the kind that betrayed a man fighting both anger and humiliation. His mouth opened again, but what escaped wasn't a word, only a faint, inaudible murmur, the kind a person makes when their mind is scrambling for a foothold. The camera zoomed in tight, capturing every twitch, every flicker of panic hiding behind that once unshakable smirk. The man who had spent years commanding rooms with bravado suddenly looked like he was shrinking inside his own suit. The chairman, sensing the unbearable stillness, raised his gavel. The wooden block trembled as it echoed across the chamber. Bang! "Mr. Trump," the chairman said, voice steady but urgent, "you are required to respond." Another bang followed, sharper this time, as if to jolt Trump back to life. Yet Trump didn't rise, didn't even flinch. His shoulders hunched forward ever so slightly, and his right hand gripped his pen. Instead of writing, instead of making a point, he tapped the pen against the desk, a hollow, uneven rhythm. Click, click, click. Each sound rang louder than words, a desperate attempt to show control while the rest of him betrayed the opposite. From the gallery, one could almost feel the collective realization sweep through the crowd. Donald J. Trump was rattled. The indomitable wall of confidence he had built brick by brick, insult by insult, was cracking right before their eyes. A man who had prided himself on dominance was cornered by something simple, something undeniable: paper, ink, and truth. And it wasn't just the truth that hit him, it was the messenger who wielded it with precision. Jasmine sat composed, her posture straight, her hands folded calmly in front of her notes. She didn't gloat, didn't grin, didn't even smirk at his collapse. Her silence was louder than his protests had ever been. She let the weight of the evidence hang in the air, refusing to interrupt the spectacle of his unraveling. That restraint, that calm, only deepened the impact. It wasn't a brawl anymore. It was an execution of words, and Trump had walked right into it. The audience could sense the shift. Heads turned not toward Trump, but toward Jasmine, as if waiting for her to speak again, waiting for her to hammer the nail deeper into the coffin. But she said nothing. Her eyes were sharp, locked on him, not with anger, but with clarity. That stillness was a weapon in itself. She knew it. He knew it. Everyone knew it. Trump could have faced a shouting match, but he had no defense against silence that carried the weight of evidence. Trump finally tried again, his lips moving, a stammer of half-formed syllables. I... But the words fell apart before they could take shape. His hand shook slightly as the pen tapped faster, betraying the nervous energy clawing at him. The man who once wielded insults like artillery now looked like someone stripped bare before the court of public opinion. It was the image of a fighter who had swung too hard, missed, and stumbled right into a counterpunch that knocked the wind out of him. The chairman struck the gavel once more. "Mr. Trump, you must respond," he repeated, though his voice carried less force now and more observation, as if he too recognized that no response was coming. Trump didn't look up. His eyes remained on the table, fixed on the papers in front of him, that now looked less like shields and more like evidence stacked against him. His breathing grew heavier, audible even through the tense hush of the chamber microphones. In the corners of the room, aides shifted uncomfortably. Some Republican members crossed their arms, their expressions dark, as though unsure whether to intervene or distance themselves. A few leaned toward each other, whispering behind hands, but the whispers had no confidence in them, no energy. Across the aisle, Democrats sat in stunned quiet, their eyes wide, some scribbling notes furiously, others simply letting the moment etch itself into their memory. It wasn't politics anymore. It was history unfolding in real time. The cameras captured every angle, beaming it live into millions of homes. Across the country, viewers leaned closer to their screens, sensing the power dynamic shift in a way rarely seen in Washington. For years, Trump had walked into hearings and dominated the air, turning them into theater where he was the star. But not today. Today, he was silent. Today, he was cornered. And today, the silence told a louder story than his bravado ever had. The pen tapping grew frantic now, irregular, like the heartbeat of a man under pressure. Trump's knuckles whitened as he gripped it tighter, trying to steady his hand. But the tremor betrayed him. The image broadcast to the world was not of a strong leader defying his critics, but of a man caught in the snare of his own contradictions, unable to summon the bluster that had always bailed him out before. And then came the collective understanding, unspoken but undeniable. The balance of power in that room had shifted entirely. Where Trump had once loomed as the untouchable figure at the center, now Jasmine was the axis around which everything turned. Her evidence had cut through the fog, her composure had elevated her above the fray, and his silence cemented the shift. Everyone watching, from senators to staffers to the public at home, saw it. In that moment, it was no longer about wealth, fame, or political weight. It was about credibility, and Trump had just lost it. The chairman, his gavel now resting against the block, studied Trump carefully. He didn't push further, didn't press harder. There was no need. The damage had already been done. The longer Trump sat there, head down, pen tapping in nervous bursts, the more undeniable the truth became. The man who once thrived on commanding the spotlight had been eclipsed by the very light he sought to control. Jasmine didn't move. She didn't even blink. Her stillness was surgical, letting the silence expand, letting Trump's inability to answer become its own testimony. She knew that sometimes the sharpest strike was not another word, but the absence of one, because the world could see for themselves what words could not cover. She held her ground, unshaken, letting the moment define itself without forcing it. And in that restraint, her strength became undeniable. Trump's lips parted once more, as if he might finally say something, but no words came. Only a faint exhale, shaky and uneven, before he dropped his eyes back to the table. The fight was gone, and everyone knew it. This wasn't just a stumble. This was the image of a man undone. Undone not by shouting, not by theatrics, but by evidence and composure wielded like precision weapons. And as the chamber sat frozen in that realization, the truth became impossible to ignore. The balance of power had shifted, and it was Jasmine Crockett, not Donald Trump, who owned the room. The storm had passed, but Jasmine didn't let herself bask in the silence it left behind. She didn't stand at the podium to declare victory, didn't turn to the cameras to sharpen a headline, didn't even smile for the press that waited like wolves outside the chamber doors. She simply returned to her desk, her fingers brushing over the stack of documents as if they were familiar allies, not trophies. Where others might have drawn breath from applause, she drew it from order. Lines, signatures, filings, cold ink on warm paper. The room had roared, the air had split, yet her heart beat steady because she knew the truth did not need noise to survive. Every move she made was deliberate. She gathered each exhibit she had unveiled, slid them back into their folders, and clicked the brass fasteners tight. Reporters were still buzzing in the hallways, microphones still searching for a quote that would become a viral spark. She gave them none. Instead, she lowered her head over the next case file, the lamplight pooling around her like a spotlight in reverse, not meant to show her off but to sharpen her focus. This was her rhythm: prepare, present, prove, and move on. No grand performance, no curtain call. The power in that silence was almost unbearable for her critics. They had expected her to chase the spotlight, to step outside and raise her hands like a boxer after a knockout. They had wanted to call her dramatic, attention-seeking, eager for fame. But Jasmine didn't give them that satisfaction. She refused to play into the caricature that had been drawn for her. By doing nothing more than returning to her work, she did everything. She proved that her victory belonged not to her ego, but to the evidence. That was the strike they never saw coming. And what evidence it was. Each page was a blade honed by hours of sleepless labor, each number a stone carefully laid into a foundation that no insult could shake. Jasmine had stacked those facts like bricks, mortar made of patience, walls built to withstand arrogance. Where Trump had tried to bulldoze with bluster, she had built a fortress with figures. And when the walls held, when his blows bounced back against him, the sound of his frustration became louder than any words she could have shouted. Respect isn't given by tower, she had said earlier, and the irony echoed. Towers could crumble, but documents, filed and signed, outlasted even steel. Jasmine's lesson wasn't just for him. It was for everyone who had ever been told their voice didn't matter unless it shook the room. She showed the opposite. Your voice matters when it can stand in stillness and let the truth echo for you. Her staff noticed it first. They watched her under the dim light of her office, pen scratching across the margins of a deposition, eyes narrowed not with rage, but with resolve. One aide whispered, "She's not even celebrating." Another replied, "She doesn't need to." They could feel it. This was not a woman chasing a headline. This was a woman anchoring herself in something heavier, something immovable. That weight was truth, and she carried it as calmly as others carried coffee cups. Meanwhile, outside her closed door, the world was on fire. Clips replayed, analysts screamed, commentators split into sides like armies clashing on digital battlefields. But Jasmine did not step into that war. She stayed with her files. When staffers asked if she wanted to respond to the latest spin, she shook her head. The record already speaks. And it did. It spoke louder than the voices trying to twist it, clearer than the ones trying to drown it out. Every statistic, every bank statement, every contract she had laid bare was now etched into history where even power could not erase it. The real drama was not in the shouting match. It was in the restraint. Imagine a boxer who, after delivering the winning blow, simply lowers their gloves and walks back to the corner. No raised fists, no victory dance, no gloating smirk. Just the quiet knowledge that the fight was decided. That was Jasmine in those hours after the hearing. Her composure didn't dampen the impact. It magnified it. Because silence after truth isn't emptiness, it's resonance. The members of the committee felt it too. Some tried to hide it, adjusting their ties or shuffling their notes, but their eyes betrayed them. They knew the balance had shifted. They knew they had witnessed not just an exchange, but a reversal of gravity itself. The room had tilted, and the weight no longer sat where it always had. And Jasmine, without lifting her voice, had been the axis. The beauty of it, the part that left jaws tight and spines stiff, was that Jasmine never once used rage as her weapon. Rage would have been easy, expected even. Rage could be dismissed. But evidence? Evidence couldn't be laughed off, couldn't be shouted down, couldn't be waved away with a dismissive hand. When Trump had tried to sneer, "Fake numbers! Another witch hunt," she had met him with the scalpel of fact. "These numbers are not mine. They come from your own bank." And in that moment, it wasn't her voice carrying the power. It was the cold impartiality of his own documents. That's why she didn't need to boast afterward. The proof had already done the boasting. The documents had already shouted in their own language, louder than any insult could. What Jasmine did was refuse to clutter the silence with her ego, and that restraint carried its own kind of force, a force that unsettled her opponents more than any fiery outburst could have. This was the human lesson beneath the political theater. Power isn't in the volume. It's in the weight of what you bring to the table when the shouting stops. Anyone can yell. Not everyone can stand steady while the room erupts around them. Jasmine stood. She didn't flinch when dismissed as girl, didn't stumble when told she was nobody, didn't bend under the laughter. She met insult with data, arrogance with proof, spectacle with substance. And when the dust settled, she was still there, calm and unshaken while her opponent struggled to breathe under the debris of his own words. And here's the truth that hung in the air after she walked out of that chamber. Strength doesn't always look like fire. Sometimes it looks like stone. Sometimes it looks like a woman who, after being humiliated in front of the world, chooses not to scream, but to lay another page of evidence on the table. Sometimes it looks like the refusal to answer insult with insult, but instead to let silence carry the sound of truth. Her silence was not weakness. It was strategy. It was the steady drumbeat beneath the chaos, the calm eye of the storm, the proof that you don't need to raise your volume if you already hold the facts. And that's what unsettled those who watched, both friend and foe alike. They realized they had witnessed something more than a clash of personalities. They had seen the anatomy of dignity laid bare, step by step, fact by fact, unshaken by noise. The lesson was undeniable. You don't win by shouting louder. You win by standing taller when others try to shrink you. You don't beat arrogance with more arrogance. You beat it with proof so solid that even silence feels heavy. That was Jasmine's victory. That was the drama that outlasted the shouting. She didn't draw her strength from the crowd or the cameras. She drew it from the quiet, from the ink on paper, from the knowledge that truth, patient, steady, relentless, was the ultimate equalizer. That was the final twist of the knife. While her opponent had wielded insults like weapons, she had wielded restraint like steel. And in that restraint lay the most devastating strike of all. The silence lingered, hanging in the air long after the gavel's echo had faded. It wasn't just the end of a confrontation. It was the birth of a realization. Something deeper than politics, bigger than power, had taken shape in that chamber. Everyone felt it, even if they couldn't put it into words. And that was the moment, the perfect bridge, when the story stopped being just about Trump and Jasmine and became about something universal. Because what unfolded that day wasn't only a clash of voices or an exchange of evidence, it was a lesson written in real time, carved into memory like a scar. It showed the kind of strength that doesn't rely on shouting, the kind that doesn't need cameras or applause, strength that doesn't demand respect but earns it, strength that lives in the stillness, where truth does the talking. And it was there, in that stillness, that the real message began to surface. At its heart, the lesson was painfully simple. Real power doesn't come from volume. It comes from resilience. Jasmine stood through insults, through laughter, through the sting of being reduced to girl in front of the world, and she never broke posture. She never let her voice rise to match his. Instead, she let her proof rise higher than any insult could reach. That choice, that restraint, became the strike that no one could block. The world often mistakes noise for strength. The louder someone yells, the more dominant they appear, at least on the surface. But the chamber revealed the opposite. Trump's shouting grew desperate, wild, unhinged, while Jasmine's silence turned sharper, stronger, deadlier. Her composure was the contrast that revealed his unraveling. It wasn't the insults that landed hardest that day. It was the calm reply. Respect isn't given by towers. Respect is earned by truth. That was the echo that lived on after the hearing ended. In coffee shops, on buses, in classrooms, people repeated it. Not because it was flashy, but because it was undeniable. It reminded them that dignity isn't about the tallest building or the biggest bank account. Dignity is about being unshaken when others try to shake you. It's about refusing to bow when power tries to bend you. And that message cut across every boundary: race, gender, class, even politics itself. The human lesson came with teeth. It wasn't sentimental. It wasn't sugar-coated. It was carved out of conflict, soaked in humiliation, tested in real time. It proved that strength is not what you scream when you're winning. It's what you whisper when you're under fire. Jasmine didn't walk away victorious because she outshouted him. She walked away victorious because she outlasted him. Her calm was the shield. Her proof was the sword. And both were impossible to defeat. Strength isn't fire, one observer said afterward. It's stone. That was what the room had witnessed. Stone. Solid, unbreakable, standing in the path of a storm that tried to tear it down. The storm spent itself, the stone remained. That image burned itself into the minds of everyone who watched. They realized that sometimes the most heroic act isn't to throw a punch or to scream a retort. Sometimes the most heroic act is to stand, calm, unyielding, and let the storm die out around you. The drama of the day disguised the simplicity of the lesson. It wasn't about one woman and one man. It wasn't even about politics. It was about anyone who's ever been humiliated, dismissed, reduced to less than they are. It was about workers told they don't matter, students told to sit down, voices told to stay quiet. Jasmine became a mirror for them all. She proved that you don't need permission to stand tall. You just need the courage to refuse to shrink. And that's why the lesson struck so deep. Because people watching didn't just see a politician versus a president. They saw themselves. They saw every moment they had been told, sit down, girl, in some form, at school, at work, at home. And they saw the possibility of answering not with rage, but with proof, with dignity, with resilience. They saw that even the loudest, most powerful voices can fall silent in the face of truth. The cinematic power of that moment was not in the clash, but in the clarity. The hearing wasn't a boxing match, it was a mirror. It showed how arrogance collapses when faced with fact. It showed how insults shrivel when met with composure. It showed how power built on noise cannot stand when someone refuses to play the same game. The truth didn't shout. The truth stood. And in standing, it won. That is why the story refuses to fade. It lingers not as gossip, not as a headline, but as a parable. A parable about the strength in silence. A parable about the dignity and restraint. A parable about the courage to let truth strike for you. The lesson wasn't that Jasmine humiliated Trump. The lesson was that she didn't need to. He did that himself when faced with evidence he couldn't deny. And so the human takeaway became a rallying cry in its own right. Not a cry of rage, but of resolve. People didn't repeat her name in chants. They repeated her words in whispers. Respect is earned by truth. I'm not here to serve you. I'm here to serve the truth. Those lines didn't just belong to her anymore. They belonged to everyone who heard them, everyone who needed them, everyone who found themselves standing a little straighter after the fact. The power of a lesson isn't in its delivery, it's in its endurance. And this one endured because it was born in fire and carried out in stone. Jasmine Crockett proved that you don't need to raise your volume to raise your strength. You don't need to match insult with insult. You need to stand steady, stand silent, stand with proof, and let the world learn what strength truly looks like. When the noise finally died, what remained in the room wasn't applause or shame. It was a message, clear as a bell and heavy as a verdict. The first meaning is simple enough to say and hard enough to live. Power isn't volume. It's the balance you hold when someone tries to knock you off center. It's the way your hand stays steady while the table shakes. It's the decision to answer insult with information and pressure with precision. Power isn't the roar that fills the chamber. It's the calm that empties the lie. The second meaning cuts deeper. Dignity is a tactic, not a costume. You don't put it on to look good. You use it to stay upright when you're pushed. Dignity is how you refuse to become the thing that attacks you. It keeps your questions clean and your record cleaner. It turns silence from a pause into a weapon that never misfires. Third, truth doesn't need favors. It needs daylight. Give it receipts, signatures, dates, and it will build its own spine. Truth doesn't panic under pressure because it was built under pressure, line by line, check by check. When bluster arrives, truth lets the paper speak. And paper, when it's real, outlives any headline. Fourth, respect is not inherited by towers or titles. It is earned by the courage to let facts decide the argument. That means no shortcuts, no theatrics, no sugar for the cameras. It means holding the record up, steady, visible, undeniable, and letting the room choose what it can't ignore. That is how respect is won and how myths are retired. Fifth, anger is cheap. Composure is expensive. Anyone can shout. It costs nothing to be loud. But composure demands preparation, discipline, and the nerve to sit with the silence after you've laid down the evidence. The lesson is not never feel anger. The lesson is don't let anger spin your credibility. Sixth, leadership is not the ability to drown out a critic. It is the ability to withstand the echo of your own choices. If your story collapses when the documents arrive, you weren't leading, you were performing. Leaders survive scrutiny because they travel with proof. They file what they claim, sign what they say, and stand where their records will hold them up. That is not glamorous, it is grown. Seventh, institutions look slow until the day they look permanent. Hearings feel dull until a single sheet of verified text changes the gravity in the room. The cameras capture the shock, the minutes capture the truth. One is a clip, the other is a record. The record is what the future believes. Eight, there's a right way to handle disrespect, and it is not to become its mirror. You do not trade slur for slur. You stand, you ask, you show, you stop. That rhythm beats arrogance every time because it starves the show of oxygen and feeds the truth with air. Remember, a clean question carries further than a dirty answer. Ninth, courage does not always look like the charge. Sometimes it looks like stillness under fire. Sometimes it looks like the refusal to flinch when the room expects you to explode. Sometimes it looks like a voice that never rises because the evidence already has. Courage isn't the spark, it's the ember that doesn't go out. 10th, spectacle is a mortgage that comes due. You can finance a reputation with noise, but the interest rate is brutal. The day documentation arrives, the debt gets called. If you have the receipts, you sleep. If you don't, you stall. Spectacle can buy time. It cannot buy truth. 11th, the blueprint for anyone watching is practical and repeatable. Prepare until your facts are heavier than their tone. Ask narrow, clean questions that funnel toward one point. Present exhibits in an order the mind can't resist. Pause and let the weight do the talking. Then hold your ground while the silence works. 12th, this isn't just a political note, it's a life skill. In a shop floor dispute, bring the logbook. In a family argument, bring the calendar and the bill. In a school board meeting, bring the policy and the line it violates. People respect what they can verify. They surrender to what they can't deny. 13th, humility is not weakness, it's insulation. It keeps the ego from short-circuiting your case. It makes room for correction, so your next step is stronger than your last. It refuses to waste bullets on applause. Humility is how you win a big moment and still get back to work. 14th, character shows up when microphones do. If your respect depends on who is watching, it's not respect, it's theater. But if your posture is the same on camera as off, people can feel it. They don't need a memo to tell them what is real. They know. They always know. 15th, timing matters. Truth lands hardest when you let it arrive in order. Foundation first, frame second, roof last. Lay the base with dates and sources. Raise the walls with reconciled numbers. Set the roof with the one exhibit that seals the argument, then step back and let the house stand without you. 16th, there is a difference between winning and being proven right. Winning can be manufactured. Proof cannot. Winning can be loud. Proof is often quiet. Winning can be contested. Proof is hard to unsee once you've seen it. If you must choose, choose proof. 17th, integrity is a long game played in small moves. It is the email you don't send, the jab you don't throw, the shortcut you refuse. It is the habit of writing things down and the courage to stand by what you wrote. Integrity does not dazzle, it endures. 18th, the most dangerous lie is the one you tell yourself to survive the day. It works until the day the record catches up. The meaningful message here is not don't get caught. It's don't build what can't stand daylight. If you wouldn't read it out loud, don't write it down. If you wouldn't sign it, don't say it. 19th, the audience has a job too. Your responsibility is to stop letting noise substitute for proof. Ask for sources, ask for context, ask for the document number, the case file, the page. The truth is not fragile. It can survive being checked. 20th, respect the pause. After you present your best evidence, do not flood the room with words. Let the air get heavy. Let the eyes wander to the exhibit, the signature, the mismatch. Silence is not empty. It is a pressure chamber. In the right hands, it crushes falsehoods into powder. 21st, Never confuse calm with softness. Calm is a sharpened edge covered by a sheath. It draws only when necessary, and when it draws, it does not miss. Calm protects the case from contamination by ego. It gives the public something to trust. 22nd, what you carry matters more than who you confront. Bring the receipts. Bring the timeline. Bring the standard in the place where it was broken. Then bring the patience to let people meet the truth at their own speed. Persuasion is a marathon wearing the shoes of a sprint. 23rd, there is a way to turn humiliation into leverage. You don't rewrite the insult, you outlast it. You let it reveal its source. You let it prove your opponent's weakness for you. Then you place the evidence beside it and let the contrast teach the crowd. 24th, accountability is the hero people don't cheer for until it saves them. It is slower than rage and quieter than scandal, but it works. It is the math test for power. Show your work. If the answer is right, the process will stand. If it's wrong, the process exposes where the lie began. 25th, the story reminds us that fairness is not passive. It is designed, enforced, and defended. It needs custodians who love documents more than microphones. It needs watchers who know the difference between a quote and a record. It needs the courage to say, let the record reflect, and mean it. 26th, there is grace in refusing to take victory laps. When the moment breaks your way, walk back to your desk. Close the folder. Open the next one. Not because triumph is small, but because the work is bigger. Let the public learn not from your celebration, but from your consistency. Finally, remember the image that won the day. A person standing still while the room tried to shake them. No victory lap, no shouted finale. Just the steady weight of evidence and the quiet that follows when a lie runs out of breath. That is the message that traveled beyond the chamber and into every room like it. You don't need to be louder to be stronger. You need to be truer and let the truth finish the fight. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.